So a few weeks ago, I was dredging the proverbial sea floor of YouTube looking for a very legal recording of Catherine Tate and David Tennant's Much Ado About Nothing when I found this.
I see my father, the king, your father, in my mind's eye.
Above all, to thine own self be true. Hamlet.
And when I tell you, I watched this trailer with absolute glee, a stupid little smile on my face because yeah, I love to laugh. I love a little irony watch. And I hardly ever come across something so seriously done and yet so dated. While I love the vibe of these, and I really wanted it for the thumbnail, I think I'm gonna have to switch to my normal glasses so that I can actually see my notes. Listen, I am a theater kid at heart. I have always loved Shakespeare's plays because there are some moments that are just infinitely translatable across all creeds, ages, eras.
But masters, remember that I am an axe. Though it be not written down, yet forget not that I am an ass.
And it is such a universal thing. Like, if you haven't been dragged to see Shakespeare in the park and get eaten alive by mosquitoes, you've definitely seen The Lion King. And to me, at least, just like everything I learned in high school, it seemed kind of like a fact. Because you learned it at the same time you learned about natural selection. And if you were me, the Civil War, being about states' rights. And then, you know, we obviously had a lot of unlearning to do. But I was immediately obsessed with this trailer because it is not something you can view except through the lens of the 90s. Because as much as IBM would have liked this to be the case, faxes are not universally translatable. This movie is Shakespeare's original script set in the grungy, hyper-capitalist 90s New York. My drive to watch this was fueled by the same drive that made me watch the 1996 Psycho remake. The what the fuckness of it all, because I wanted to watch it and see how they could possibly have made it work. So I consulted the premier expert about Hamlet, my friend Stephanie, who you may not know, but knows more about Shakespeare than 99% of all living humans.
We're talking about just why Shakespeare in general, right?
Yeah.
I love the poetry of the language and the fact that it still has that poetic resonance 400 years later. It really is a testament to his craft.
Sure. I guess what makes an adaptation good?
The goal is not to copy what's been done. The goal is to take that and synthesize it with your individual creative process to produce something new.
Okay, well, why do you like Hamlet the best?
Oh, there are so many reasons. First of all, Hamlet is one of the very first plays to explore a character's conflicting motivations. And I think something that's really cool about this play is that it was written as a response to the uncertainty of its time period. Because of Henry VIII marrying and divorcing and beheading everyone, the country had been going back and forth from Catholicism to Protestantism.
Yeah.
That means like the entire country is changing religion. In many ways, Hamlet represents uncertainty, contrasted with the fact that really the only certainty and what Hamlet accepts in this play, ultimately, I think, is that everyone is going to die. I think that really of all the Shakespeare plays, this is the one that I think still haunts us. It's the one that we've never been able to fully puzzle together. We're not finished with the legacy of Hamlet.
Sure. I think you should be a professor.
I would love to.
Okay, so we want an adaptation that's new, that's relevant. So considering that, does this version work at all? Okay, low key, they kind of cooked here. I actually ended up liking it a lot. Do not get me wrong, I thought it was goofy as hell, and I think I might be uniquely situated to enjoy something like this because I am a Shakespeare film theater kid who considers myself somewhat of an antiquarian for insane movies. So I was super interested in what was happening, but I doubt most people would be. Visually, it splits the difference between American Psycho and Succession, but it reminded me of Succession a little bit more, which is already kind of a Shakespearean tale of siblings fighting for control over their father's kingdom. And I think that setting Hamlet in this hyper-capitalist landscape was a really interesting choice. It's all chic glamour, and Hamlet kind of presents as a moody trust fund kid. And I think in terms of modernizing the story, setting Hamlet in the context of a big, rich American Fortune 500 company slaps so hard. Because honestly, I think that those big companies are kind of the best analog for what royalty was back in the day. They live in their walled-off little estates, people serve them hand and foot, and companies are often passed from father to son because of a funny little thing that maybe you haven't heard of. It's called nepotism. Hamlet feels like he is entitled to this kingdom, and he's also very sad because his dad just died and been replaced by a comically evil, sneering Kyle MacLachlan, who his mom is so horny for that she literally cannot think straight, and now his entire future is all derailed. I loved their weird penthouses with their furniture that looked terrible to sit on. And, spoilers, when Hamlet kills somebody, they're all so rich that it doesn't fucking matter. They just cover it up, which also tracks. In terms of the casting and characterizations, I feel like everything tracked really well into our world. This is the rich boy back from college who thinks that because he made something, it's high art. This is a moody teen girl who is obsessed with a boy because she thinks he's making high art and she simply isn't old enough to know any better. This is her concerned brother, and this is Bill Murray. Ethan Hawke as Hamlet perfectly captures this like 90s grungy rich boy vibe. Julia Stiles is fresh off of her innovatory work in 10 Things I Hate About You. She is so good as this moody teen, and I'm obsessed with her hair. I love that her parents let her cosplay as someone who needs to rent out a studio in the bad part of town. I am obsessed with Kyle MacLachlan as the evil King Claudius. There is just something about the shape of his face and his Mr. Big ass haircut that really works as this scheming executive. And I'll be honest, I thought I was gonna hate Bill Murray at first because his pattern of speech is so specific, it kind of drowns out the Shakespearean dialogue.
Think yourself a baby that you have taken these tenders for true pay, which are not sterling. Tender yourself more dearly.
But I ended up liking that he made Polonius more of a sympathetic, modern father. He adds a lot of sweet gestures, like he ties his daughter's shoes for her and he slips money in his son's coat, instead of other Shakespearean parents I won't name who try to kill their daughters for being wanton one time. So my one gripe with the characters is that they just had to no homo Horatio. I mean, I get it was the 90s and I might be a little biased, but I just remember in every adaptation I've ever seen, I've always been like, so, you two, what's your deal? But fine, in this version, he lives with a woman, so he can't have a crush on Hamlet, so whatever. Stephanie also said she liked adaptations that seemed to interact with the material in a new way, and I feel like there were a lot of smart ideas in here. Okay, I know this seems like the most obvious thing in the world, but believe me when I was shocked to discover that a few scenes that in the play take place one after the other were intercut in the film. Like, at the beginning of the play, Horatio sees the ghost of Hamlet's father, and then in the next scene, he goes to Hamlet and says, "Hey Hamlet, I saw the ghost of your father." But in the movie, they intercut these scenes where Horatio goes to Hamlet, says, "I have something to say to you," and then they cut to the scene of him seeing the ghost. Because that is exactly the solution that not only makes the story feel faster paced, but you can use Shakespeare's original language while updating the storytelling style to film. They also intercut in some scenes where in the play, a character would just come in and say, "Oh hey, I had these two guys killed off stage." Now Hamlet can say, "Hey, I had those two guys killed," and while he's telling the story of how he did it, we can see it happening. I also like that they were able to change the settings of a few of these scenes, because in the play, obviously, you can only have a few settings and the whole thing is basically set within a castle. For example, one of the climactic scenes happens in a laundromat, which I thought was really interesting. It just makes the whole story a little more visually entertaining. Another thing I was hooting and hollering about was that they made most of Hamlet's soliloquies voiceovers. And maybe that's happened before in an adaptation, but it's just the first first time I've seen it done. But immediately I was like, yes, my smart friend said that Hamlet was a conflicted person. And what do we use in modern filmmaking language to show someone's internal conflict in monologue? A voiceover.
To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing, end them, to die, to sleep, no more.
Also, somehow all the scenes felt like a normal length, even though I know they must have cut a bunch. Since I am not my smart friend, I find it hard to concentrate on a lot of Shakespeare's dramas, but with all the new locations and the cuts they did to the script, it felt like every scene was an appropriate length for a scene in a movie. Although the goofiness of the high-end tech was definitely what drew me in, I do think that once I was able to put my 90s blinders on, it actually did blend in kind of well. They got faxes instead of letters, they had Polaroids instead of paintings. Hamlet makes a film instead of having actors put on a play. And I think it actually could have been totally immersive if I was able to somehow forget what decade I live in now. But here's my gripe, that I honestly think kind of spoils the whole thing, which is the acting. And to me, that's where all that modernization just falls apart. Stephanie said that what's important about this play is that the characters are complicated, conflicted, not always acting in their best interest. So in acting class, they teach you to break up scenes and monologues into different sections, to pick a new emotion or motivation for each segment and let that change how you deliver lines. This helps break up the monotony of 15 to 20-minute scenes into little bite-sized chunks of emotion. And if you've ever seen Tyler Joseph Ellis pretend to do this badly, or a high school production of The Glass Menagerie, you know what I'm talking about.
I love you! I love you. Enough! Enough.
And I cannot stress enough how much this really helps when you're doing Shakespeare, because more often than not, modern audiences have no idea what the fuck you're saying. They really can only tell how you're feeling. Shakespearean actors are also trained to speak with a certain cadence, a musicality that makes the script seem more like a long poem.
To die? To sleep? To sleep? Perchance to dream? Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause.
And that is the language that Stephanie loves so much. And this film, they are not doing that. They have to tone down those emotional beats for their moody close-ups, and to me, it is just not working. I was really into the vibe of this film, but I ended up toning out most of the dialogue because it was spoken in monologue and I had no idea what anyone was talking about.
I would I had been there.
I would have much amazed you.
I will watch tonight. I'll speak to it, though hell itself should gape and bid me hold my peace. And I pray you all, if you have hitherto concealed this sight, let it be tenable in your silence still, and whatsoever else shall hap tonight, give it a understanding but no tongue.
Again, it's not like I hate the performances. I think Ethan Hawke does a really good job of embodying this character. I just had no idea what the fuck he was saying the whole time. So, bad pitch. Keep as much as you can of the skeleton of the thing, but modernize the dialogue. I thought of this when Hamlet and Ophelia had a really tense scene, because I was like, wow, I am really invested in these performances when the lines are short enough that I can understand what they're saying.
I did love you once.
Indeed, you made me believe so.
You should not have believed me. I loved you not.
I was the more deceived.
This movie was fun for me to watch because so many of my special interests align with what it was about, but I think that to make an adaptation like this enjoyable for most people, just Lion King it. And Stephanie, if you're watching, I, in my mind, am actually trying to support your argument, because I think that simpler language would actually preserve the integrity of the characters. If they can speak plain English, they can be better understood, and if they're better understood, we can have a better insight into what they're thinking. Sure, we're losing the language, but we're losing that anyway through the actor's delivery. So let's actually just get back to what the play is actually trying to say. And speaking of that, what is the play trying to say? Stephanie gave me a great summary of what it meant back in the day. It's about a struggle for succession, a generation growing up not knowing what god they're supposed to pray to, and believing that if they pray to the wrong one, they're going to hell. Hamlet struggles with the hard truth. The only thing we know is that we are going to die. So what do we do with all that information? That existential crisis? No, I'm asking you. She said that we are not done with the legacy of this play. But for that really to be true, I think we need to update the existential problem that Hamlet's dealing with. What god specifically you're praying to doesn't really seem to me that much of a problem anymore. Literally, Y2K, the fictional disaster caused by computers at the turn of the century, seemed like the biggest problem back then. At least for the next few years. And frankly, I'm not sure what this version of Hamlet is existentially anxious about. Hamlet is rightfully both angry and angsty about his father dying and his mother remarrying this obviously evil dude so quickly. One thing I worry about with this modernization of how he says his lines is what really comes across the clearest is that he is an angsty boy. He is clearly showing signs of depression, but I admit that I kind of saw him as more of the stick and poke, Zen, Carhartt kind of depressed. You know, the people who make being sad part of their aesthetic. He is a tragic hero, but he's not really someone that I'm primed to relate to. Mainly because he's just a little too rich, and they don't talk about it. This is likely my 2024 vision, but I feel like because shows like White Lotus and Succession are so popular nowadays, although they will never be my favorite show about rich people.
I mean, it's one banana, Michael. What could it cost? $10?
You've never actually set foot in a supermarket, have you?
I don't have time for this.
They have taught me to expect that the wealth of a piece of media's character should factor into what that thing has to say. Especially because this is set in the hyper-capitalist New York of the 90s, where the central conflict is a man who kills his brother for the power of being CEO. Okay, another bad pitch. Hamlet is an artsy boy. Maybe he has a picture of Angela Davis up on his wall. He's made it clear he's going to art school and he wants no part of his father's fascist company. But then his dad dies and now his uncle's in charge and he's kind of lost because now he's definitely not gonna inherit the company, whether or not he has a choice. Because even though he was a radical on paper, he never quite turned his back to the wealth and power that was promised to him by his birth. And that greed and confusion and anger about something he didn't even really know he wanted is the thing that drives him into that murderous rage. And because of all this rage and hatred surrounding the wealth that has corrupted the very core of this family, they all kill each other, and they are dead by the time that their competitor arrives to take over the company. So then it's not only about this conflicted character, but it's about what conflicts him, what corrupts him. And not to be depressing, but just turning on the news nowadays, you see in real time the corruption that festers when people have too much fucking money. Basically, I wish that this version did more to update the message of the play. Because again, like Stephanie said, this is the play that haunts the collective Western psyche. We are not finished with the legacy of Hamlet. This movie is well made. It can be quite goofy at times. It's interesting to see as an adaptation, but not really as a movie, because it doesn't really update the context or use the script to dig into the emotions of the characters. While we might not be done with the legacy of Hamlet, judging by the fact that I've never heard of it before a few weeks ago, we are done with the legacy of this film, and for all of its epic highs and lows, it really just becomes a goofy trailer for some idiot to laugh at 20 years later. Something she watches to forget about the existential quandaries that she deals with. Not something that really makes her grapple with them, like the original did.
To be or not to be. That
That is the question. Whether it is nobler the mind to suffer slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and lie opposing, and to die, to sleep, no more. And by sleep, to say the end